Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay and see me for a while at least. Let's go ahead and get started for our session today for our check-in. Again, if you are dropped from the session or if I am dropped from the session and I can't return within 5 minutes or so, just check for the recording of the session that I'll post on your Canvas site. So that's going to be the process we'll keep doing for a while now. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be covering some logistical information as we always do. Just to remind ourselves as to the agenda and the purpose of this meeting, I'll be providing you with some key information and provide sort of an opportunity for a summary and overview of the material that we've covered this week in the video lectures, as well as an opportunity for you to ask some live questions. So we'll be looking at a few reminders and an announcement today, and then we will review some of the problematic questions that were in the previous exam. So we'll go over that. And then we'll focus on a summary / overview of the topics we've covered this week. And then I'll have a formal Q&A, but of course, you can ask questions at any time. As you can see, we're on this slide that says, using your chat feature, please send to me, your host, present, so that when I start giving out some points for attending some of these sessions, I can have you counted among them. Okay, please go ahead and do that if you wouldn't mind. Okay, so that is the plan for what we're going to be doing this morning. Hopefully it won't be too much of a long session. It's going to be somewhat straightforward today. All right, just a reminder by way of what we always expect doing a particular unit. Of course, I'm assuming that you're going to keep reading your textbook chapters. The chapters are not long, but they can be kind of heady at times with some deep concepts. Complete the chapter quiz homeworks, review and annotate the lecture notes that are provided to you, view the video lectures as well as the lectures or videos from Crash Course and School of Life that should give you a little bit more in-depth information on many of the topics that we will be covering. And of course, there are going to be standalone discussion forums that are already outlined in your course syllabus. And I usually will provide a review session and or a study guide just prior to the unit exam. Okay. So that is the flow, again, that we always expect to do for each unit once it starts. We've just completed the last unit, and we've began this week the unit that starts off with chapter 8. So the administrator sent me a little note here that I need to cover a few things with you. It's the fall 2020 administration of the graduating senior assessments. As many of you may be aware, there are certain types of goals that the school sets for themselves for their graduating seniors by way of knowledge and information. And we use a variety of ways to test that. And this is one of them, this assessment. So let me go ahead and read this real quickly to you guys, and I'll post this information on Canvas again, as well as send it out in an email. Because of COVID, we're prepared to assess seniors completely online this semester. Your actions are crucial for success. That's why they send it out to all the classes and instructors who teach senior class, which this is. So all seniors who are graduating fall 2020 must complete the assessment, and this is a graduation requirement. The deadline is going to be November the 1st. Graduating seniors must first take the exam by using the link provided to the attached fact sheet, and I'll have that link sent to you as well as placed on your Canvas site as well. After registration, students will receive instructions in their Bronco email to test online and without an appointment, and it'll be unproctored as well. All eligible students will test online because of the coronavirus. We will not be testing any time on campus this semester. And so seniors who are graduating in fall 2020 should register for the ETS assessment using the link. And after you register, you'll be sent email with more information concerning the testing. Now, I don't have a great deal more information about it, but if you do have some questions right now or a comment, go ahead and please make it, and I'll see if I can find out an answer for you if I don't have it. Anyone? Okay. All right. So again, I will post this information on Canvas, and as well as send it out in the email and provide you the link so you can go ahead and take care of that. All right. Okay, let's stop looking at me for a while and let me get into it. All right, so this week we started the discussion on chapter 8. We also began the part of the text in the course that starts to focus a great deal more on psychology. And so this is one of the first chapters that really focuses on ideas that are considered to be very psychological, and you probably will be able to recognize them as well. So one of the things that we do before we get into a lot of that, we want to revisit a few ideas that we've discussed before. So we're going to be revisiting what we know and what we can know. And to the degree, this goes back to chapter 4 when we talked about Rene Descartes as well. And we'll talk a little bit about him as well during this session too. So we talk about what is skeptical and non-skeptical attitudes. So skeptical and non-skeptical attitudes. And this is really dealing about what it is that we know and how comfortable we are in knowing this type of information. So what we have here is a few terms like dogmatic skepticism. And dogmatic skepticism is the idea that nothing can be known, nothing is true, and all human claims to knowledge are false. So sort of a pessimistic view, but the idea of dogmatic skepticism is that we can't be certain of anything. Then we have Pyrrhonian skepticism. Certainty is impossible, so the wise person should suspend judgment about theoretical matters. So again, an idea that we don't know certain types of things, certainty about knowledge is impossible. And then we go touch onto a few things that we have spent some time discussing already this semester, and that's going to be empiricist. So we have empiricist foundationalism. And the empiricist foundationalism basically is the senses provide the ultimate criteria for justifying belief. So all we got to do is use our senses, and from that we can know the truth of things. We can have true certain types of beliefs. And of course, we've discussed issues with that. And so contrary to the empiricist view, as we see here, our own immediate sensations and senses are no guide for objective circumstances, meaning that, as Rene Descartes pointed out, our senses do lie to us. Okay, so we can't fully trust them. So that cannot be the sole determiner of what truth is and what certain knowledge is going to be. Then we have the rationalist foundationalism. And here, the senses give us subjective or deceptive appearances at time, and only reason provides the foundation for certain knowledge. So the rationalists, however, they have an issue as well. When we talk about rationalism, we're talking about people using logic, okay? And however, when they make their arguments, a rationalist must base these logical arguments on a premise. Okay, but these premises are also based on, guess what, other premises. It becomes sort of like an infinite recursion where it keeps going on and on, that is always based on something else that we have to take for granted. And they may use axioms, which they say this we'll just accept as being true, but it does not necessarily mean that it is true. So with the rationalists, we see that these arguments that they have is going to be based on premises, which is going to be based on other premises, which can be problematic. So contrary to the rationalists, reason cannot provide a foundation for true belief. There are going to be some faults with that as well. So the other thing that we see is authoritarianism. And here the idea is certain individuals, priestly authorities, authors of sacred books or texts, are empowered to know and speak the truth on fundamental matters. And this is the way it was for a long, long time, where the church was the key authority figures and told people what to do, the reason for their lives and things of that nature. We still have some of this already today as well, where we do sometimes look to individuals who seemingly have the answers. But according to thoughts on this, humans are variable. And what they mean by humans being variable is that everyone has an opinion. And these are going to be people who are are intelligent, reputable, and these opinions, however, may be contrary to other reputable, intelligent individuals. So we have this variety and we don't always agree. So then the idea is, then who do you choose to be the authority figure? So contrary to the authoritarian perspective, no human beings can be regarded as having some special insight into the truth. And again, we've seen in previous chapters where the idea of the truth is something too that you have to put quotes around, because we've talked about in a previous chapter where the truth can be seen sort of as subjective. We all have our own personal truth, our own subjective truth. It can be something that we can experience, but it's not something that can be taught or trained. So those are the basic ideas that we see that sort of helps to establish why the rationalists had to try to figure out some way to address some of these issues that were dealing with skeptical attitudes and skepticism. All right. So this gets us to Rene Descartes. We're revisiting him now. I apologize. I think I skipped something. I did. Hold up for 1 second while I try to figure out what happened here. Yep, I skipped the exam review. I apologize for that. So let's go back real quickly here. So we have completed the second unit, and this is exam 2. And the adjusted average, you may have noticed that the grades have been adjusted somewhat for that second exam. And so the average should be around 80% or so. So I want to go over some items that were missed or somewhat problematic. And normally what I do by way of judging which items to put up here is I look to see how many people missed a particular item. And so with these items you see bulleted here, they represent items that were missed at 70% or more, meaning that over 70% or more people missed this particular item. So that's why they're up here. Some of them are a little bit surprising, but let me go over some of these ideas real quickly. First, the mind's mental states, according to materialism. And materialism, again, is one of the theories of mind that we talked about in the beginning of this particular section, are caused by complex and sophisticated states of the brain. So the basic idea or premise here is that the physical nature of the brain, the neurons and how they fire and how they're connected, that is what gives rise to mental state. And so that is what gives rise to the mind. And then we talked about Rene Descartes' dualism. And dualism is a view that the mind and body are being different substances that interact in some way. And so the notion here is, and we'll see how he came about this again as we review Rene Descartes in this particular section, but the idea here is that these two substances are independent and different, but interact in some fashion. And that's what a lot of people were referring to, like Locke and Berkeley, as they went back and forth going through some of the ideas of Descartes. One of the ideas that were offered up was property dualism, which saw the mind and body as one substance, not totally two substances here, but one substance, but with different properties. And we'll see a similar idea come up here when we talk about Spinoza. So Rene Descartes' view also was one of a mechanized universe. And what he meant by a mechanized universe is basically the idea that everything in the world is mechanical in a certain sense, that we are machines to greater or lesser complexity. And what they meant by this idea that this sort of disenchanted the world is that previous to that, the world was seen more in a mystical sense. It was sort of like more magical, that there were special essences that Aristotle would say that were around that would cause people, to feel like there was some sort of magical connection. And so when science and philosophers like Descartes came onto the scene, they removed a lot of the specialness of humans and of the world. And so this is just that idea that the disenchantment design of the world was done when Rene Descartes started looking at the universe as being somewhat mechanical. And then one of the other items dealt with George Berkeley. His view was that perception is reality. And remember, he was an immaterialist, an idealist, and the idea that he believed was that there was nothing physically real that existed. Nothing physically real. It's all about perception. And more importantly than that, in order for there to be some sort of existence, he believed that there needed to be an observer. So this was part of a reality that depended upon the observer being there. And that's what is meant by to be is to be perceived. And so one of the items in the test talked about what about God? But the idea is if someone is not around to see something happen, then from Berkeley's perspective, if you look at it very seriously, then those things don't exist because there's no one there to perceive. But what he would say to that is that God is always there, and so he sees all. So that's why things maintain their existence, even if there's no human being around to do the perceiving. And then the other item that we want to talk about is John Locke's view of personal identity. And he had this notion that an individual having a chain of connected memories representing what he referred to as psychological continuity, that you remember when you were 20 years old, you remember when you were 15-year-old, and your 15-year-old remembers when you were 10, and so on and so forth. And this is one of the ideas that talks about our personal identity. Now, there was another item too that some people responded to, and that dealt with bundle. And bundle theory is somewhat related to that idea as well, but it does not have that chain of connected memories idea like psychological continuity does. And then Immanuel Kant just wanted to understand that he saw the foundation of knowledge as organizing raw sense data. It was about the organizing of that data that we get in our sensory input. And the last two items dealt with Friedrich Nietzsche, who discussed how some individuals, such as Superman, become the best version of themselves. And this was somewhat roughly analogous to the ideas of reaching one's potential. And we've seen this in several ways. I'm sure as you've gone through your psychology classes, one that comes to mind would be self-actualization from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you become the best version of yourself. And then finally, it was about romanticism. Remember, romanticism was a reaction to the ideas and principles of enlightenment. And so they would view natives totally differently. So if you lived during the Enlightenment period, and you went to some uncivilized, quote, uncivilized land, and you met the natives there, you would probably refer to them as savages, because they're not civilized like you are. But during the Romanticism period, that was not the type of thing, because now people who are of native lands are seen more connected to nature and more valuable in some sense. And so now they're not savages, but they are noble savages, so to speak. All right, so those are some of the items there. Were there any questions about this? I apologize for the rough sequencing here. I don't know how I skipped this slide. Are there any questions about any of this?
No.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, so let's get back to where we were. So we were talking about the skeptical ideas. We finished up the idea of authoritarianism, and then we moved on to start talking a little bit about the Mac Daddy of doubt, and that would be Rene Descartes. All right, so Rene Descartes, who in a real sense is a huge chunk of what we talk about and started many of the conversations that we will continue to discuss, even all the way to the end of this course in chapter 18. He plays a little bit of a role as well. So Rene Descartes, as you recall, he began to doubt everything. And he wrote Discourse on Method, which was his search for finding truth amidst falsehood and establishing sound foundations. So basically think of it this way. Rene Descartes suddenly realizes that he can't trust some of the knowledge that he has. And this sort of puts him sort of in a little bit of a tailspin, and he has to figure out some way to build foundations that he can rely on. And that's why he was so adamant about having something that was certain, having certain knowledge. And so that was his driving, motivating factor. So he developed this discourse on method to try to tease apart falsehood from truth, to try to get at what is really certain knowledge that one can possess. So he had 4 parts of his method, and they are as follows. One, never accept anything as true unless it is clear, distinct, and immune from doubt, free from doubt. And 2, divide all difficulties into as many parts as possible. 3, start with the easiest and simplest elements and then proceed to the complex. And 4, keep complete notes and comprehensive reviews so nothing is omitted. So by doing this, by having this discourse on method, he was able to gain his first certain knowledge. And as we know, his first certain knowledge was, I think, therefore I am. He proved to his satisfaction that he was a doubting slash thinking being. All right. And from that, he came up with a notion, an idea that the mind and body are separate, which led to his notion of dualism. All right. And so we see from that, from this doubt, this place of doubt, he was able to build a systematic approach to try to find something that he could really sink his teeth into, so to speak, to serve as a foundation for all his other knowledge. And so the story goes that he was able to build everything back up again, all his knowledge bases. Okay, but that was the start of it. I think, therefore I am. So that sort of sets the stage as how he had the question about how he dealt with his doubt. And that's what skepticism really truly is. If you think about it, it's about doubt, doubting what it is that we know, all right, and what others know. So that takes us to the next individual, Michel de Montaigne. And with Michel de Montaigne, he basically stated the following, that we must constantly question ourselves, revealing how little we actually know. And he was doing this at a time when people were very smug and self-assured in their belief and in their knowledge. Believe it or not, there were times, and we may see these as times like that as well, where some people believed they knew everything they needed to know, that everything that needed to know about reality and the world was known. Okay, so at this time, people knew the absolute truth. So that was part of the environment that Michel de Montaigne was living in at the time. So he also suggested a couple of things that harken back to the scientific attitude. You may recall the scientific attitude. I know it's mentioned quite a bit in the intro psych text, intro to psychology. So I know for some of you it was a long, long time ago. But the idea of this scientific attitude, it emphasizes such things as curiosity, skepticism, and humility. And so we've already talked to a large extent about skepticism already, and we know what curiosity is: the search for wanting to know things, the motivation, the intrigue that you want to find things out. But what humility is, by way of science, is this: understanding that we don't know everything, and understanding too that at times we're going to be wrong. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we talk about scientific attitudes that include curiosity, skepticism, and humility in intro psych text at the very beginning, is because when you're doing research on psychology, oftentimes you may come up with a theory or some research study and it doesn't turn out the way you expected it to. And that's just the way it goes. So you have to accept that and move on. He also talked about avoiding personal feelings and prejudices, getting into your thinking process, because when that happens, a lot of bad stuff can happen, where we lose we lose focus on what it is that we should be doing, and we don't get the type of information that we should be getting, and that can be very, very problematic, and we want to try to avoid that type of behavior. All right. So basically, Michel de Montaigne, he had lots of concerns that were of great interest to many, many individuals, and the rationalists, they wanted to try to address the concerns that Montaigne had. And so what they focused on was a priori knowledge, okay, knowing stuff before, so using logic in that sense, postulating an active mind, looking at acting the mind actively engaging itself with sensory information. They're utilizing deductive arguments that show the grounds for a specific conclusion. So they sort of build their case using logic and rationale. And so we see that was one of the key things that led the rationalists to try to address the issues of Montaigne and try to address some of those general issues about skepticism that we covered at the very beginning of this presentation. And so let's look at least a couple of the rationalists that are discussed this particular week. And one of them is going to be Baruch Spinoza. And Baruch Spinoza, he had a lot of ideas. And some of the ideas that he offered got him into some trouble. But one of the ideas he talked about was God, universe, and nature. He saw these as being equivalent. God, universe, nature. This force, this entity was the power behind everything. One real substance, that was reality. God, universe, and nature. And he talked about knowing or getting to know this and study this was one of the highest virtues that one could have. So from his perspective, he saw reality as one substance, okay, with different attributes. And so this was referred to as the double aspect theory. So again, we're seeing this sort of being positioned to compare or contrast with the idea of dualism, where we have the mind and the body, these two separate things that interact in some fashion, but they're two separate substances, where here we're talking about one substance, but they have different attributes. So a couple of other ideas that Baruch Spinoza discussed, which are kind of out there to a degree by some people's opinion, there is no free will. Everything is determined. No free will. We talked about determinism earlier at the very beginning of the course, actually, that we depend on some degree of determinism when we're talking about science. We have to be able to determine things. That's one of the key things of science. We have to find things out. Something does cause something else. So here he's saying that everything is determined, and if that is the case, there is no free will. When you were in that accident a couple of years ago, the accident was meant to be. It had to happen. Now, a couple of other ideas that, of course, you can see some people would have some potential issues with, because it goes into some sort of religious areas in a way. It's about things like good and evil. And what Spinoza communicates is the idea that things such as good and evil, good or bad, these are not things that really exist in his view of the universe or God or nature, whatever you want to call it, in that reality. So he basically communicates this idea that things of good or bad, good or evil, these are human constructions that we make them up. It's how we have to view things. And so that's what it comes down to. Now, as you can see in the lecture and your reading, he had many other ideas that really did address religious areas, and to a large degree, that's why he got into a little bit of trouble. And he was excommunicated for his views. So again, we see rationalist ideas here, trying to use their logic and reason to try to understand the nature of the universe. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. All right, so we're moving along here. So then we get to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and he proposed a monadology, and he proposed these ideas, these things called monads. And monads do not interact with each other. They may combine to result in what we experience. So in a way, we can use this sort of as a descriptor in a way. Let's say you're in a storm. You may not be aware of the sound of each individual raindrop, But these miniature perceptions, these miniature drops that are happening, they do add to your full and more complete experience, and that's what we hear. So he had this notion of monads, their existence, and that he saw that the mind again is active in manipulating sensory input. Again, an idea that we just recently saw again, that was offered by someone else as well as Kant, where it's about how it is that you're organizing the sensory data that's coming in. So basically, there are other rationalists that were discussed in that chapter and in our notes, but the legacy of the rationalists was basically this. They acknowledge the importance of curiosity that should be allowed to run its course, despite the fact that there were many forces out there that would go against it. So you got to understand, when these individuals were alive and coming up with many of their ideas, there were going to be institutions that would not go along with some of the ideas. And we know this because we've seen and read about how, for example, the church as an institution would treat some of these individuals. But the key thing that the rationalists and the empiricists really agreed on was the idea that curiosity should remain to go unchecked because of the value of what ideas they would come up with. All right, so that leads us to the next section, which talks about the key ideas of psychophysics and the physiological areas of psychology. All right, so psychophysics is the study of the relation between the body and the mind in matters of sensation and perception. All right. And so Gustav Fechner is usually going to be associated with this. He is the founder of this branch of psychology, and he published The Elements of Psychophysics in 1860. Now, one would note that 1860 is sooner or earlier than 1879. And so some people sometimes would say that 1860 could have been a date for us selecting the start of psychology as a science. But we've gone with 1879 instead, and that's with Wilhelm Wundt, and we'll talk about him a little bit later. But Gustav Fechner in 1860 wrote The Elements of Psychophysics, and what all this really amounted to was he was interested and saw as the real question was not how the mind and body interact with each other, but how the mind and body correlate, are associated, or related to one another. And that was his main interest. He was very interested in the idea that we can measure things. We can measure the mental, the things that are going on in the mind. And so he sought to find a relationship between the inward world of sensations and the outward world of objective events. So when we see something out in the world, what is it that we are experiencing? What is it that we're seeing? So he was trying to correlate that. Now, a lot of his work was done based on this next individual, Ernst Weber. And this sort of is back in the area of the rise of experimental psychology. And he did a lot of work on such things as 2-point threshold, for example, how easy it is for you to tell when there's 2 points on your scan that you can distinctly tell there's a difference of these 2 points where they are, the just noticeable difference or a difference threshold, being able to tell two things are different from one another. And so one of the things that Ernst Weber is known for is sort of like the first quantitative law in psychology. And that is Weber's law, which was utilized to attempt to find out how much, what percentage of some sort of stimuli needs to change for us to be able to detect a difference. And so the idea of the 2-point threshold, the simple explanation would be is that with the 2-point threshold, what we're seeing here is remember, most of the research that we're seeing with Weber and Fechner is going to be with thresholds. Do you guys recall threshold research at all? Anyone? Okay. All right. So basically, the 2-point threshold is going to be basically like this. It's going to be basically the when you are able to feel 2 points being separate. Okay. For example, let's say you have tweezers. Okay. And you're wanting to try to say, can you recognize when the two objects are one or separate from each other? So you can start the tweezers off together and then you let them open up slowly. And so the 2-point threshold is going to be, okay, when can you tell that there's 2 points as opposed to one? Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So the idea with thresholds, if you recall, is this. Threshold is when you're able to detect something being present 50% of the time. So if you have something done 10 times, 5 times you were able to see, yeah, it's there. And 5 times you weren't able to say, yeah, it's there, even though it may have been. So that is your threshold. And so what Weber was doing research on our ability to detect thresholds. So remember, what we're talking about here is we're trying to figure out about sensation, and that's going to be the physical stuff that people are doing to us, like holding tweezers, slowly as a point and then opening up really slowly on our arm, okay, or showing us a feather and seeing if they touch the feather on the back of our arm with our eyes closed, when can we tell it's there? So the idea is that we're trying to say, when is something going to get beyond the subliminal to the liminal so that we are aware that it's there? And that's what all this threshold research is about. And that would include the absolute threshold, when you're able to detect that something's there, or the just difference threshold, when you're able to say that one stimuli is different from the other stimuli. So that's what Weber was doing. So he was doing some hardcore work in a way in the area of science. So this was stuff actually being done. This is objective stuff being done using the body, their sensation, and their ability to perceive it. Okay. And the idea is that someone asked, would this be related to reflexes? I don't think directly related to reflexes. Reflexes, I think, would be a whole different area to some extent, because reflex is going to be about our automatic response to certain parts of our bodies being stimulated. You hit a certain point, and when that doctor hits that little rubber hammer to your knee area and it jerks and you kick, they're testing to see if your nerves are working okay. And so those reflexes are there to serve vital functions for our ability to make sure that our equipment is working fine, and so that we can detect things and reflexively respond to it when necessary. Here, they're using this information primarily to detect your ability to detect things, your threshold. When is a threshold being reached? And again, I know it always sounds funny about threshold, but the definition of a threshold is simply you're able to detect it 50% of the time and not the other 50% of the time. So the idea here is that it's about our sensations and our ability to perceive them. Reflexes would be slightly different. Okay. All right. So as we look at that, that gives us what Weber was doing was very instrumental for Fechner and for psychology as a whole, because what we're saying is some really quantitative stuff. There's some subjective stuff, because you have to depend on the person saying, yes, I feel that there's 2 spots as opposed to 1, okay, or I see that light is brighter than the other, okay. But again, he is correlating it to something that is physical, and they have some sort of mathematical type of relationship. So as we move to the next slide, so what it comes down to with Ernst Weber, so he's talking about sensation, and here sensation is our senses, our sensory organ, okay, our body and those sensory receptor cells that are in our body. Okay, there's the body part. Okay, but then it gets to our mind, and that is the perception part. Okay, so we rely on this all the time because, as you know, our senses serve a very important and vital role for us. When we are walking across downtown or whatever and going across the street, we need to sense our environment. Our eyeballs are sensing stuff. Our our ears are sensing stuff, and we're taking all that stuff in. That's going to be sent to the brain, our mind, so we can have perception. And this perception will tell us what our current state is and whether or not we need to take some sort of immediate action. So if you're walking across the street and you see a truck barreling down at you and they seem to be burning rubber, your body is going to get instructions for you to do something about it. All right. And this stuff is very instrumental for us and very key to our survival. So the work of Ernst Weber was key for a few things here. One, the mind and body are different and separate. The other thing, the mind and body are connected by a mathematical relationship. Then the mind can be studied scientifically, because that's what he was doing. Therefore, psychology can be a science. Fechner viewed Weber's law as connecting body and mind. So he loved it, all right? He wanted to be able to demonstrate a connection between the body and the mind so scientific people could accept the existence of mind. Remember that there would be a point where, when we got to our behavioral psychology phase in America, at least, where they wouldn't want to have anything to do with the mind. Okay, it was all about objective things. So here we're seeing, to some extent, the foundation of them saying that the mind is important, that we can study this thing using these techniques. And that is one of the reasons why Fechner was very appreciative of the work of Weber, because he saw that this allowed for that connection to be there, to really truly exist. All right. So what's next? So in the next thing, to wrap things up here, what we see is looking at other aspects of physiological psychology. So in psychophysics, we're seeing the connection between sensation and perception / mind, and we're trying to correlate how those things are related to each other in some sort of mathematical way. And that was based on the work of Weber and then later Fechner. Now, some other individuals, some other people were doing some things at the same time as well. We have Johannes Mueller, who did demonstrate that some nerves respond maximally to specific types of stimulation. So he was able to demonstrate that we have specialized nerves or receptors that are designed to pick up on certain types of stimuli. All right. And so that makes perfect sense. Good for him. And so we know now we have sensory receptors in the eye and the retina. We have it on the basilar membrane within the cochlea in the ear to allow us to hear, and the retina to allow us to see. We have the olfactory bulb in our nasal cavity to allow us to smell. So we know all these types of things. But he also proposed this notion of something called vitalism. The idea that there's this vital energy that goes beyond the physical and the chemical processes that exist within the body and is distributed. This vital energy is distributed in specific ways by the nervous system instantaneously within that nervous system. So we have Johann Mueller coming up with this idea of vitalism. He came up with some other ideas, which we have some support for. But at that time, we do have Hermann von Helmholtz, who you're familiar with. I'm sure he was instrumental in a few things. He disagreed with this notion of vitalism and saw it as an idea not worthy of the scientific analysis. In fact, if you think about vitalism, it's sort of related to the ideas that we saw previously with Aristotle in the previous section, where he talked about these special essences. You recall the special essences. People will say, why is it that rocks fall to the earth? Why is it that fire reaches into the sky? Because the rock is trying to get back to the special essences of other rocks, and fire is trying to reach into the sky for the sun. So in a way, Helmholtz probably saw this idea of this vital energy, this vitalism that was proposed by Mueller in a very similar fashion. So he did not see this was something worthy of scientific analysis. And so we didn't go into the research, but Helmholtz's research was conducted, and he was able to demonstrate that the energy of life could be explained in terms of the physical and chemical processes of the body alone. Sort of an idea of the conservation of energy, that everything that we need in order to live, we have already within us, and we don't need to go outside the body for some special type of energy, some special type of vital energy in order to show us alive, to be alive. So that way it was sort of suggested that that did not have much merit to it. In addition, he was also able to show the nerve transmission was not instant. Our nerves go fast, but it doesn't go fast as electricity, and it's not instantaneous at all. So through research, and you can imagine some of the research that would be done for that, but through his research, he was able to, poke holes in the ideas proposed by Mueller on the area of vital energy or vitalism. Now, Helmholtz, as well as others, but he was very instrumental, as you may recall some of his work from other classes. Helmholtz was responsible for, shared some of the credit for the trichromatic theory of color vision. And that was the one where he proposed the different types of cones that allow us to see. He's also responsible for the resonance place theory of auditory perception. So he was very much a front runner in the area of physiological psychology. Okay, the idea of how it is that we can relate psychological concepts, our physiology, to our ability to sense things and perceive things and that nature. So that gives us a sort of an overview and summary of what we talked about in psychophysics and physiological psychology in chapter 8, along with the rationalism idea as well. What we'll be doing a little bit later next week, and I'll try to get the video up earlier for you guys, is going to be focusing on the area of evolution. And again, I think we'll probably be going a little bit quicker with some of these type of sessions, because some of this information I'm sure you're already somewhat familiar with, as we move a little bit further away from a lot of the philosophical ideas and move more into some of the more psychological ideas. All right, are there any questions?
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of things real quickly before I let you guys get out of here. I've already made the first pass at your second essays, and I'll be posting those grades in a little bit. I got sidetracked. I'm still dealing with some computer issues. For those of you who have already gotten some of my uploads with feedback for your papers, you probably will see a name on there. It says Cherie Hubert. I had to move to another computer, so I'm using someone else's computer to grade your papers as I try to deal with my recently demised computer. The idea is that those should be posted really soon, as well as your midterm grades should be posted before late this afternoon. All right, are there any other questions or comments before I let you guys out of here? Okay, then, if there's nothing else, you guys are free to skedaddle. You guys have a great weekend, and I will see you guys later, okay? Bye.